Hello, cuties. So we're getting back into it with the late night enlisting because I'm an idiot. um, we're just gonna go dive right in. I'm trying to just finish this shit up. We need to do two more matches. Hopefully, hopefully they're quick and we can get all this stuff done in just two matches. It should be possible. So we're gonna try. Go low. Wait, can I re-roll any of these? Nope. Yeah, it was looking good in Moscow, and then some guy just fucking overtook my ass. Unbelievably. Anyway, let's listen to more of Nate Hagen's TGS 158.
Sure. And I'm going to put those on hold briefly and ask you
Fucking
what
conquest.
originally brought your attention to what you now refer to as the meaning crisis. Was there a moment where you noticed something or had to grapple with a sense of meaning in your own life?
Oh, there's two answers then. When you added that extra element to the question. I went through leaving a very fundamentalist form of Christianity and now realizing because of how traumatizing it was. But then there was this, well, I often say it leaves a taste for the transcendent in your mouth, and that taste needed to be fulfilled. And I went on a long sort of journey, and and I made a lot of mistakes, and I learned a lot. But as I started to get both a theoretical answer from cognitive science and an answer in practice from taking up, Tai Chi Chuan and Vipassana meditation and meta contemplation, things like, and then returning also to the Socratic Neoplatonic form of ancient philosophy. As I started to do that, I started to notice when I was talking about those things and the confluences, my students would lean forward. And they would really like, oh,
Oh, damn it, of course.
This happened just a couple weeks ago. I'm doing a course. My courses are popular. Sorry, that's not meant to be self-promotional. I'm just trying to make a point, right? And I'm doing a course on, thinking and reasoning. Talking about problem solving, talking about insight, and then I'm talking about this proposal that we can possibly see the same machinery at work in insight to talk about flow and mystical experiences and how this might lead to more comprehensive transformation. And then the lecture just stopped because they want to know more and more about this. They want to know all about this. Tell us more about flow. Tell us more about these mystical experiences. What's going on in meditation? What's going on in, they come on fire. And that was happening across all my courses. And then I realized, oh, this isn't just John Vervaeke with his own idiosyncratic his story.
So I taught
Damn, what is that?
class
Just
called
an
Reality
MP4.
101 for 9 years at the University of Minnesota. It was a survey of the human predicament, and we talked about anthropology and climate change and money and energy depletion and the economic system. And we had a segment called metacognition, which is thinking about how we think. It was all cognitive biases, status, dopamine, supernormal stimuli, the whole lot. And every single year it was the most popular module of the course with the students.
Yep. Because wisdom is not optional. Everybody knows that they're beset. We're beset by a proneness to self-deceptive, self-destructive behavior. Everybody knows, at least intuitive, that they want to be deeply connected to themselves, to other people, to reality. Yes, and those are powerful, powerful drivers.
If you were able to have a time machine and go back 200 years or 20,000 years to the Pleistocene and small hunter-gatherer bands, do you have meaning in your lives even have been a relevant question?
I think 200 years ago, I think it's a question, because 200 years ago, we're in the middle of the scientific revolution, and we've just gone through the Protestant Reformation and the religious wars, which has really shaken faith in institutional religion. We have the shutting down of our culture's wisdom institutions, the monasteries, and we have the beginning of the rise of mass media because of the printing press, etc. And all of this is putting tremendous pressure on a lot of the traditional ecologies of practices and communities where people went to deal with these kinds of issues. And so people are being diverted into other things. You see the beginnings of the rise of the isms that have a pseudo-religious status, especially nationalism. You see the French Revolution and how it very quickly becomes a pseudo-religious ideology, the reign of terror. They're worshiping the goddess of reason, and like all of this stuff that's happening. So 200 years ago, I think it's a viable question. 20,000 years ago, probably not, especially if you're still in a period where shamanism is pervasive. Winkleman's research showing that
My
hunter-gatherers
rally.
having shamans is like ubiquitous. And I think shamanism, I've heard it described as actually the world's oldest profession. So it's a long-standing set of practices for altering consciousness, inducing the flow state, transforming one's sense of identity, that is tremendously beneficial to the community. I gave a talk about this in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. And I think in that world, you have access to the kinds of things I'm talking about. You have a community, you have a long-standing tradition, you have credible, trustworthy individuals who you consider wiser than yourself, who can guide you as you attempt to deal with these issues.
How much of meaning is culturally established or historically 20,000 years ago explained and directed by the shaman, and how much of it is emergent from a single individual mind that explores and understands it?
Yeah, this is a really good question. I'm teaching a course now on the cognitive science of religion, and this question is at the core of it. It's hard to talk about
I know he mad.
Shamanism in our culture because that's several historical epochs behind us. But if we looked for a question that I think is relevantly analogous, we can address it. And this is, okay, so mystical experiences have a profound impact on people's sense of meaning. They often are tremendously transformative. People are willing to undergo massive self-correction as a result of the mystical experience. And so there's been this long-standing debate between the perennialists and the constructivists. The perennialists saying, no, it's a sui generis, it's a unique experience, it emerges just in individuals, it's perennial, it's universal. And Aldous Huxley, the perennial philosophy, is sort of the prototypical, although his book isn't quite as ham-fisted as that. And then you have Katz on the other side saying, no, it's all culturally constructed. All that's happening, everything that's happening in the mystical experience is culturally constructed, it's going on. And I think what's coming, what I argue for, convergent with other people like Studstill's amazing book on the mystical traditions, just powerful, is what's called neo-perennialism. And the idea is something like this.
Hey, we're top one.
That there are universal processes, and you need that because you
that
have to
rally
explain
back up
why
so I
it
can
is
stay there.
that atheists in North America who do not have any religious upbringing, have not been enculturated, can have powerful, in fact, deeply disturbing and troubling mystical experiences. And if it's just culturally driven, what's going on there, right? And then you also have to deal with the fact, okay, that there seem to be some important universals, but you have to be very careful about what those universals are. And so what I think neo-perennialism argues is there are universal processes that, right, happen regardless of your cultural setting that can power mystical experiences, but those mystical experiences are also heavily influenced by the environmental factors. Now, let me give you something where that doesn't sound so wishy-washy and Canadian compromise, okay? Which is like this. Evolution, and I think the process of relevance realization is strongly analogous to biological evolution. Evolution is a universal process, but it doesn't predict homogeneous populations of organisms. It actually predicts massive diversity as they fit their cultural context. So we can have a biology, we can talk about them universally, but that doesn't mean that all of life is, homogeneously the same, because adaptivity just varies tremendously. In the same way, the mystical experience, which is about this relevance realization machinery, is about having a profound insight, right? There are universal processes at work. That's the perennialist part. But it's neo-perennialist because it admits that those
What? That
processes
guy's ahead of me.
nevertheless have a top-down
He shot down
constraint
2
by the
vehicles.
culture and the history that they're in, so that they fit the context. Because, of course, the mystic typically wants to
That's
transmit,
annoying.
communicate, and transform the lives around him or her.
So you mentioned that atheists have mystical experiences. How do you
Yes.
define a mystical experience?
So a mystical experience is a profound sense of self-transcendence. So the supersalience of one's sense of self, it diminishes. Before that sounds too weird. That's a feature of people having awe experiences or flow experience. The sense of the self is diminished. You become much more reality-centric than egocentric. You feel a profound at-one-ment, like you're having the deepest, most systematic insight you could possibly have, that is calling to you and drawing you beyond yourself, self-transcendent in a very powerful way. It's highly ineffable. You find that you can't put it into words, you can't articulate it, and you feel this profound at-one-ment.
I feel that when I'm in an old-growth forest, for example.
Yes. Yes. So that's exactly the point, right? That if you want to say, no, it has to be of the Abrahamic God in order for it to count as a mystical experience, then you're moving towards something that's getting more like the old perennialism.
Where the
that,
fuck was he?
Right? When it's like, no. What I would ask you,
Oh.
what John Vervaeke would ask you is, that's the forest.
He's just
Well,
getting
what was that
further and further
experience? I
ahead.
would want to see what are the adverbial markers of the process rather than the adjectival descriptions of the object.
So I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole, but given that you're a cognitive science and a professor of all these things, what might you speculate is the adaptive explanation for mystical experiences from an evolutionary sense?
So the thesis that I'm going to argue for, talked about in the cognitive, in the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and in the book I'm writing on the cognitive science of religion, is cognitive continuum. And it's this idea. Newberg has a similar one, but mine's different enough and independent enough. So let's start with something that is pretty well established, which is the fluency heuristic. And notice how this concentrates on process, not content. So I give you 2 texts. The texts are exactly equal, all the same words, all the same letters, right? One is black and white, black marked white. The other is red and orange. And then after reading these texts, and I do it, I counterbalance it so it's different times, or I do it with different people, blah, 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 blah. So I get rid of all of those confounds we worry about, right? I then ask, well, which text do you think is which is more true?
Oh, you shitting me.
Which one do you think is more true? You pick the black and white, not the red and orange. No difference in the semantic meaning.
Well, I would think
What?
that black and white would be what modern people would think because it's credible, because they see it in newspapers or
Right.
science papers or whatever, but red on orange seems more true to an ancestral perspective because it could represent blood or fire or things more earth-based.
That's great as a proposal, but you can control for those sort of cultural influence. And what it turns out to be is it has to do, because this turns out to be a domain general feature, which means across all of your problem solving, you're using this fluency heuristic. Now, originally we thought it was something like ease of processing. If you can process the information easier, it's more likely to be true. But that just doesn't work.
Damn, he's
for all
at 3
kinds of
now.
people.
Fuck, he's a
if
whole
I start repeating
1,000
a thing
ahead of
over
me.
and over again to you, cat.
Oh, we're
You don't go,
toast.
oh, like you're not getting a sense of increased truth, right? So the proposal instead is that what fluency is tracking, the proposal that I'm arguing for with my colleagues, is that what fluency is marking is this capacity for
I'm
your
so
system to
dumb.
optimally grip its environment. That it's finding the
to
sweet
pick
spot
machine
between
guns.
trade-off relationships. Let me give you a perceptual example so you know what I'm talking about. So here's this bottle. This is from Merleau-Ponty. Well, how should I look at it? How should I grip it? Should I grip it really close? Well, maybe. That depends if I need the details. Far away? Well, maybe. Depends if I need to see the whole thing. Like this? Pointed like this? Like this? And the answer is, well, there is no answer. It depends on the context of the problem. And what you're going to do is you're going to find the sweet spot between all those trade-off relationships that fits you
Damn,
best
he's
to that
flying.
situation for solving your problems. That's called optimal gripping. So it's not ease, it's ease of optimal gripping. That's what fluency is marking. Okay? So then what you get is the proposal, not just by me, by other people, that the moment of insight, the aha experience, is a spike in fluency. Your fluency just
No
went
way,
up
we got
very
him.
dramatically, and your brain noticed that rate change. Notice how these are all procedural,
Oh, we
they're all
have no
process
wing.
markers, and you get that aha.
Hey,
that
we're back to
super
the top of the
salience. You're really
leaderboard.
drawn in. You're highly
The guy
motivated.
fucking
You even
quit.
show a hindsight bias effect.
some reason.
Like you will tend to believe things as way more true if you've had an insight
Well,
about
that's
them.
lucky for
And
us.
that's adaptive. Why is that adaptive? Because a lot of our problems come from the way we misframe things. We zero in on what we think is relevant and salient. That actually blinds us to the needed relevant or salient information. So we go, oh, I thought she was angry, but she's afraid, and everything shifts. And you know what I mean? That's an aha experience, and you need that because that's one of the most powerful self-corrective mechanisms we have for how we're formulating our problems.
So this is just the delta between expectations and reality, and when we have a big gap there, there's a dopamine hit, and we remember those periods, and we want to repeat them.
Well, I think dopamine is the criterion. I don't think it's the goal. So dopamine marks set shifting and marks things as salient for learning. So in an insight, you've had increased set shifting, and that has been coupled with you learning more. So your brain's going, do more of that. That's good. Do more of that. That's excellent self-correction. And it plugs into the fluency heuristic because your brain doesn't have to make a new measure. It can just use the fluency heuristic and go, hey, look, that's really good by doing that. So that's insight. Okay? So now, here's the proposal. The flow experience is a cascade of insights. What happens in the flow experience, let's do something that typically is done solely for creating flow because it has no other explanation, rock climbing. Rock climbing makes no sense. It's like a Greek torture, right? You climb up that rock face. You might get hurt, you might fall. And once you're up to the top, come back down, right? Now, what's going on in there is, think about it, people are moving, and notice how they're not, this is really not in the propositional. This has to do with their perspectival, their state of consciousness and attention. They're participatory. How are they actually inhabiting their mind and their body, literally shaping themselves? And they will get close to impassing, and then they have to do this massive restructuring to keep moving. That's an insight. And then that primes them for the next time. That's another insight, and you get this insight cascade.
So in some of my presentations, I discuss the 3 or 4 best technologies ever invented by humans. And I hypothesize one is the electric bicycle, and another is music or a violin, and another is a golden retriever, and another is the story. And I actually go so far as to suggest the game Dungeons and Dragons might be one of the best inventions ever, because 7 or 8 humans can sit there and inhabit a virtual world and learn and adapt. Like you were just saying, it's like a game equivalent of rock climbing. And I think this is fascinating, and sorry to interrupt, I'll let you continue. But we are currently, our economic system is turning billions of barrels of ancient sunlight into microliters of dopamine and destroying the ecosphere in the process. And yet, you've just said that rock climbing, as one example, is Greek torture, but for our minds, it's reenacting however our successful ancestors adapted to the neural architecture we have today, and there's probably dozens or thousands of such activities that are more benign on a finite ecosphere where human cultures could be learning and doing different behaviors.
So you've helped make my argument. Look at it. Dungeons and Dragons, you're right, it's a flow induction, and it also does something important. It's a ritual because it's shared flow induction. And so, right, and flow is universal across cultures, history, socioeconomic groups, linguistic patterns, all the things that are supposed to divide us. people will describe the flow experience in almost exactly the same terms. It is a genuine universal. And this is because, well, at least I argue with my co-authors, Leo Ferraro and Ari and Hera Bennett, right? That this is because flow is like optimal experience because it gives you your optimal performance because you're doing an insight cascade. Now go back to your example. Like you've got this ritual, Dungeons and Dragons, it's got a mythological narrative around it. People are in this flow state. And then you brought up the issue, well, you know what we need to really do? We need to make sure that these rituals that do depend on shareable narratives that aren't so much about what's happening as about getting us connected in the right way, right? You brought up the issue, well, we better make sure we're flowing wisely. That's exactly what you brought up. How do we know that the way we're doing our flow is wise?
I don't think I got him.
The point.
It's not only wise, but it has to be collective too, because we're not like solitary species like jaguars that are going out and getting flow state. We're an eusocial species. We have to do it together.
Well, in fact, I would strengthen that. The emerging research showing that we don't reason monologically. We actually reason dialogically. You take a standard reasoning task, the Wason selection task, you give it to the best and brightest. Since 1966 with Wason, and only 10% of university students get it. Right. You replace that with 4 people who are encouraged to talk to each other, and the success rate goes from 10% to 82% reliably.
That makes so much sense. I've never really thought about that, but and that has obviously evolutionary explanations, I would imagine. I mean, we're cooperative apes.
It's our superpower. It's our superpower. So notice how now you're helping me. See. This is how
we're in a cooperative flow state right now.
I think so, right? And so, well, cooperative flow states and shared rituals and a concern for correcting them and making sure they're wise. This is starting to sound a lot like a religious framework. And that's the point I'm trying to make. Now, I'm not talking about the content of religious beliefs. I'm talking about its functionality. Now, the thing about flow is, the wisdom question. Well, you want to make sure you don't flow like in a video game because it doesn't transfer to your life. That's why you can get video game addiction. You're flowing inside the game, and then you get the opposite in the real world, and the opposite of flow is depression. And so you get a motivational gradient that keeps feeding you back into the game, and you get locked in.
Why is that? Because when you're playing the game, you get the flow state, but then you have to go to your job or have dinner, and then you don't get flow in your real life, so you start craving that other flow?
Yeah, exactly. There's 2 things, transfer-appropriate processing and encoding specificity. Your brain not only pays attention to what you're learning, this goes back to the fluency heuristic, it pays attention to how you're learning, the manner, and how you are in that learning. So, 2 classic kinds of experiments, okay? Let's do encoding specificity. You give people a bunch of information, right? And then you bring them back in one room.
What did I spawn
and you
here?
bring them back and you divide them into 2 groups. One group takes the test in the same room. The other group takes the test in a different room. On average, the group that's in the same room does better. Even though that has nothing to do with the room, because, even something simple. You're studying for your test and you had a headache, you take a Tylenol. Take a Tylenol when you're taking the test. Because your brain is embodied. It's locked into your embodied state. That's encoding specificity. Second, transfer appropriate processing.
Oh, fucking stupid.
If you're going to take a test in which you know the professor is going to ask for short essay questions, the best way to study is to think up questions and practice answering them as short essays. You want to make sure that you're processing the material in a way that is procedurally similar to how you're going to process it when you're using it to solve your problem. This is called transfer appropriate processing. If you're flowing in the video game and it doesn't have those transfer mechanisms, you'll get locked into the video game and it won't transfer out to the world.
So I'm going to jump quite a bit ahead here. What would happen if all teenagers, 15 to 20 years old, had a deep understanding, deeper than the last 30 minutes of this conversation, but on that topic, on how to achieve flow state and how we are social creatures, and we learn better in dialogue with others, and to repeat these flow behaviors, but not in a video game. What could that change in our culture and our society?
Bruh.
So, I think what it would mean is we would
Bruh.
reprioritize transformative rituals. We would reprioritize the cultivation of wisdom. We would see the value of ecologies of practices. We would see the value of wise modelers. Very often, in order to get into a flow state, you need to go into situations that are challenging, which means you need a role model for that perspectival and participatory knowing I was talking about. You can't just get it through propositions. You have to have a credible person that you trust, because you can't see what it's going to be like after the transformation until you go through the transformation. You have to trust somebody who's gone through it and say, and trust that when they say, come, you'll like it better when you cross the river.
So that was the role of the shaman.
Yeah, and it's been the role of, I mean, I have to be really careful. I'm getting excited. I mean, I'm talking about religion at its best. One of the things I really dislike in our current culture is we compare religion at its worst to science at its best, or science at its worst to religion at its best. I think this is useless. So I'm talking about religion at its best, and I think religion at its best did this for people. And that'll allow me to go back to one more point. So you got the flow state. The flow state is already bordering on a mystical experience. The sense of self is massively reduced. People report deep senses of discovery. It's often very ineffable. They feel profound at one-ment.
Was the original flow state our marvel and awe at trying to understand nature and the natural world around us, especially in a tribe or a community?
Maybe. I mean, because why I say maybe is we have some evidence for primates, non-human primates, doing really weird things. Like there's this tribe of chimpanzees, when they pass this tree, they go over and place rocks in front of it, and weird stuff like that. So there's definitely evidence for awe, but I tend to think there's two things happening. I don't think it's one or the other. I think that's developing, and that's helping to evolve this tremendous cognitive flexibility, this ability to flow, which I've already argued has tremendous benefit. But what's also happening is what's happening between you and I, right? So human beings, right, we're ratcheting up the communication channel massively, and so our ability to challenge each other, and I don't just mean physically, I'm not excluding that. This is my friend Greg Enriquez's point. Language gives me access to your psyche in the way that no other behavior by you does. Now, so notice that language is this weird thing. It gives us our superpower because we can coordinate and we can get together with some pointy sticks and kill anything, but it also makes you vulnerable in a way that nothing else can.
Because it can be hijacked or taken advantage by other people who understand metacognition.
I can get inside your psyche really powerfully. So what we can have is right, this back and forth between us. And the flow state is you can put challenges on me and I can rise to meet them. And then I put challenges on you and you rise to meet them. And we can get this accelerating thing. And this typically happens between human beings, this sort of reciprocal bootstrapping of each other up. So the best environment, look, the problem with a static environment for the flow state is you need the demands of the situation to exceed your skills. The problem with human beings is they're good learners, and they can gain skills in the environment, and then they fall out of the flow state. You know what I can do if you're part of my environment? You're learning skills as I'm learning skills, and you can keep ahead of me. And we can get into the flow state and maintain it much more powerfully.
So I have a ton of questions that I researched, and my staff researched about your very wide and very deep work. But I'm just going to interject what I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling this odd, double-barreled sensation of awe and amazement at the human species and what we are capable of, and how amazing our mind and our superpower, as you pointed out, and how horribly we've messed it up as a culture of what we're capable of, and you know what our phenotype could express itself as in a different world. I'm feeling both those things simultaneously.
I mean, I appreciate you saying that, and I want to share back with you that hearing that is kind of, for me, aesthetics in the deep sense of that word. That's the the aesthetic poignancy of the meaning crisis. When you get a deep sense of that grasp, and it's not just an
Can this
intellectual,
be over already?
approval of a proposition. It's a felt sense that goes into the heart of your identity. We could be so much more, and we are taking this powerful machinery that can put us into contact with aspects of reality that we could justifiably regard as ultimate, and instead we have largely let it be swept up in a lot of self-deceptive, self-destructive patterns that seem to be growing in pervasiveness. When Chris and Philip and I wrote the book on zombies as the metaphor for the meaning crisis, we did the sense that we're being bullshitted is going up dramatically in our culture.
You wrote a book on zombies?
Oh yes. Sorry. So we wrote. So one of the things about the meaning crisis is, remember I was talking about the reaction, the responses? The rise of zombies as a new myth. Zombies became a myth prominently in the late 20th and, late 19th and 20th centuries, but really kicked in mid 20th century. Well, zombies are really interesting because we argued they are the mythological expression of the meaning crisis. They are,
Boom, baby,
think about them.
6K. That's a good
They
match right
are,
there.
right, drifting aimlessly. They have groups, but they have no community. They move around, but all they do is consume. But they're never satisfied.
6K on a conquest is insane. Alright, so we just need 9 semi-auto kills for this last match. Do I want to try to get 4,000 or just farm it? Yeah, I don't really care.